At exactly 4 a.m. on May 9, 1989, Keith Whitley was alone, reaching for a phone that would carry his final words to the outside world. He was the biggest star in Nashville, but in the dark of that Tuesday morning, he was hiding a secret that his wife Lorrie Morgan had feared for years. What did he say in those final hours, and why does his 4 a.m. secret still haunt the country music world today? To understand the absolute tragedy of that morning, you have to understand exactly where Keith Whitley was in his life at that precise moment. In the spring of 1989, Keith was not just a country singer. He was the undisputed king of the new traditionalist movement. He had just scored his third consecutive #1 hit with I Am No Stranger to the Rain, a song that had topped the Billboard charts barely 3 weeks prior. He was married to Lorrie Morgan, another incredibly talented country music star, making them Nashville's ultimate power couple. In just a few weeks, he was scheduled to receive the highest honor in his genre, an official invitation to join the Grand Ole Opry. From the outside looking in, Keith had conquered the world. He had everything a man could possibly dream of. But behind the velvet curtain of his skyrocketing fame, a terrifying, inescapable monster was tearing him apart from the inside out. Keith had been battling severe alcoholism since he was a teenager playing bluegrass music in the Appalachian Mountains. This was not a casual drinking problem. This was a brutal, all-consuming addiction that dictated his every waking moment. He was known as a functional alcoholic, a term that dangerously masked the severity of his condition. His tolerance was so unimaginably high that he could consume lethal amounts of liquor and still step onto a stage, look into the camera, and sing with the voice of an absolute angel. But his inner circle knew the terrifying reality. He had survived multiple brushes with death before he even reached his 30s. Once, while riding in the passenger seat of a car sipping bootleg bourbon, the driver attempted to take a curve at 120 miles per hour. The crash killed the driver instantly, and Keith barely escaped with a broken neck. On another occasion, he drove his own car straight off a 120-foot cliff, plunging into a freezing river below, and somehow walked away with nothing but a broken collarbone. Because of these close calls, his friends, his bandmates, and especially his wife Lorrie went to extreme, almost unbelievable lengths to protect him from himself. They effectively turned his life into a mobile rehabilitation center. His tour bus was entirely stripped of anything containing even a drop of alcohol. But addiction is a cunning and brilliant enemy. When Keith could not find whiskey, he resorted to drinking bottles of cologne. When the cologne was banned from the bus, he would drink mouthwash. When the mouthwash was locked away, he would drink nail polish remover. The desperation was palpable. Lorrie lived in a constant state of agonizing hypervigilance. She was so terrified that he would wake up in the middle of the night and sneak to the kitchen to drink, that she would physically tie her own leg to his leg with a belt before they went asleep. If he moved, she would wake up. That was the harrowing reality of their superstar life. But on the weekend leading up to Tuesday, May 9th, the safety net vanished. Keith had volunteered to drive Lorrie to the Nashville airport so she could embark on a promotional tour in Alaska for her own upcoming debut album. Right before she boarded her flight, Keith handed her a sealed greeting card containing a handwritten note. He told her not to open it right away, to save it for the trip home. With Lorrie thousands of miles away in Alaska, Keith returned to an empty house in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. The profound isolation of that empty home became a pressure cooker. Without his wife there to anchor him, the demons he had been fighting off for months flooded back in. He began a catastrophic weekend binge, entirely hidden from the public eye. Now, listen to me very closely, because this is where the story takes a turn that defies all medical logic and leaves investigators completely baffled to this day. When the toxicology report was finally released, it revealed that Keith Whitley had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.47. Let that number sink in. 0.47 is nearly 5 times the legal driving limit. To reach a 0.47, a grown man would have to consume the equivalent of 21-ounce shots of 100-proof whiskey in a rapidly compressed time frame. At that level, the human brain stops communicating with the lungs. The respiratory system simply shuts down. It is a level of intoxication that induces comas and guaranteed fatalities. Yet on the morning of his death, Keith was not unconscious on the floor. He was awake, he was talking, and he was executing a chilling performance of normalcy. In the very early hours of that Tuesday morning, around 4 a.m., Keith sat alone in the dark and made a phone call to his mother. This is the crux of the 4 a.m. secret. In what would be the final conversation of his life, Keith did not sound completely incapacitated. He did not sound like a man who was minutes away from his organs shutting down. He spoke to his mother with a level of clarity that completely masked the lethal volume of alcohol coursing through his veins. He engaged in casual conversation, protecting her from the horrifying reality of his condition. The secret he was keeping in those final hours was the absolute depth of his surrender. He knew he had crossed the point of no return. The functional alcoholic had perfected the art of the disguise so well that he used his final words not to cry for help, but to maintain the illusion that everything was perfectly fine. He carried the burden of his relapse entirely alone, choosing to isolate his loved ones from his pain, even as it was actively killing him. The bizarre timeline of that morning only gets more disturbing. A few hours after that 4 a.m. phone call, around dawn, Keith was visited by his brother-in-law, Lane Palmer. Lane walked into the house, and the two men sat down and drank coffee together. Lane did not see a man on the verge of death. They sat across from each other, sipping coffee, and actually made plans to go play a round of golf and grab lunch later that afternoon. Keith even talked about how he planned to spend the rest of the day writing new songs for him and Lorrie to record as duets when she got back from Alaska. Let that staggering paradox wash over you. A man with a .47 blood alcohol level, a level that would instantly paralyze a normal human being, was calmly discussing tea times and songwriting sessions. His tolerance had reached a point that can only be described as a medical anomaly. Lane Palmer left the house at approximately 8:30 in the morning, telling Keith to get dressed and be ready to leave for the golf course within an hour. Keith was left alone once again. But the human body, no matter how conditioned it is to toxic substances, has an absolute biological limit. Once Lane walked out that front door, the massive, lethal dose of alcohol finally overwhelmed Keith's central nervous system. When Lane returned to the house just 1 hour later, he walked into a nightmare. He found Keith face down on his bed, fully clothed, completely unresponsive. Lane frantically called an ambulance, but it was already too late. The brightest rising star in country music, a man who had completely reshaped the genre, was gone at the impossibly young age of 34. When we analyze the physiological reality of what happened to Keith Whitley, we are forced to confront the darkest corners of human addiction. Acute ethanolism, or alcohol poisoning, at the .47 level does not just happen by accident. It is the result of rapid, desperate consumption. The tragic irony is that Keith drank to numb a pain that he could not articulate, even in his universally beloved songs. He possessed a voice that could convey more heartache in a single syllable than most artists could in an entire career, yet he could not find a way to express his own internal agony. The pressure of maintaining his image, the relentless demands of the music industry, and the crushing weight of his own expectations created an environment where the only escape he knew was the one that would inevitably destroy him. This tragedy highlights a devastating pattern within the music industry, drawing unavoidable parallels to the legendary Hank Williams. Both men were generational talents. Both men were hailed as saviors of traditional country music. Both men were consumed by substances they used to cope with the immense pressure of their own genius. And both men died in their late 20s or early 30s, leaving behind a legacy of what-ifs that continue to haunt fans decades later. The isolation of fame is a very real, very dangerous phenomenon. When you are a superstar, everyone wants a piece of you. They want your time, your energy, your voice, and your money. But very few people know how to sit with you in the quiet, terrifying moments of the night when the applause fades and the silence becomes deafening. Lorrie Morgan tried everything humanly possible to be that person for Keith. She sacrificed her peace of mind, tying her body to his in the dark, acting as a human shield against his demons. But you cannot save someone who has fundamentally given up on saving themselves, especially when they possess the terrifying ability to hide their destruction in plain sight. When the news of Keith Whitley's death broke, the entire city of Nashville ground to a halt. Music Row was immediately lined with black ribbons. The country music community was plunged into a state of profound shock and collective mourning. But perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of this entire story brings us back to the Nashville airport, days earlier. Remember the sealed greeting card Keith handed to Lorrie before she flew to Alaska? After his death, The contents of that note took on a chilling, almost prophetic meaning. While the exact, word-for-word contents remain a deeply guarded piece of Lorrie's private life, it has been widely reported that the letter was a beautiful, haunting declaration of his undying love for her, written by a man who subconsciously knew he was running out of time. Today, if you visit the Spring Hill Cemetery outside of Nashville, you will find a massive monument marking Keith Whitley's final resting place. The epitaph carved into the stone is split into two parts. Keith's side reads, "Forever yours faithfully." The space reserved for Lorrie reads, "His being was my reason." It is a permanent, heartbreaking reminder of a love story that was shattered by the cruel, unforgiving nature of addiction. Keith Whitley's 4 a.m. secret was the tragic realization that his voice, as powerful and immortal as it was, could not silence the demons that waited for him in the dark. His legacy is a haunting masterpiece of unmatched vocal brilliance and unfulfilled potential. But Keith's story isn't the only time the music industry covered up the dark reality of a superstar's final hours. If you want to know what actually happened the night Hank Williams took his final car ride, you need to hear the truth about the missing hours the record labels tried to erase forever.